Hi everybody, it's Patricia Warby, Alchemy Therapies and My Emotional Audit. And today, very sad news of Sinead O'Connor's death, announced last week for an unexplained reason. She had struggled with her mental health for a number of years. And of course, her heyday was the 80s, where she recorded one of Prince's songs, Nothing Compares to You. That's her big hit. And she actually did many, many albums, I think 14 albums, most of which were not particularly popular. But what I've noticed this week is the sort of real grief of people who maybe weren't even a fan or didn't really know much about her. It's like we're all in collective grief for somebody who didn't need to die, although in some ways it's a typical pattern. And I wanted to talk about that today, about the effects of trauma, childhood trauma in particular. Now, I don't know how many of you have watched the documentary that was on Sky and will be on Now TV, I believe, in the UK at least. But it was basically saying about her childhood having been really very traumatic. Her father left, her mother, I think, fell to pieces basically, and was a kleptomaniac. In other words, stole things and got her to steal things. There was a period where she locked her out of the house and made her live in the garden for 2 weeks, which is, during the winter. I believe that was really, really, awful. It's just like you can't imagine what that would be like for a child. But clearly, Sinead did not have what we as children need, which is a safe, secure parent, or preferably two. In order to regulate your nervous system, you need a stable other person that can help you deal with your emotional life, that can help you to process your emotions. Otherwise, your nervous system, which is adapting to its environment by what it receives and what it perceives in the environment, cannot actually learn to balance itself well. And I think that's what we saw in her adult life, from she was outrageous, all power to her. She did call out the Catholic Church and the abuse cover-ups way ahead of her time, but the way she did it, questionable perhaps for her career. She ripped up a picture of the Pope on live primetime US TV. And so, she was outrageous. She was forthright. She was, I guess, a feminist icon. She refused to conform to the look of women around that time, where you still do have to have, certain look to be successful as a woman. You have to have long hair, eyelashes, the full works. You have to have a beautiful body. Actually, Sinead was beautiful. She truly was. But she chose to shave her head, which I think is a real act of, it's saying, up yours. I'm not going to conform to stereotypes. And not many people can carry off a bald head, certainly not women, but she managed it. She had really beautiful bone structure. So, from that period where she was successful and then suddenly she plummeted, I think can't have been easy. She tried to find solace, I think, in two avenues. Firstly, religion, because she'd grown up Catholic, as you might imagine, growing up in Ireland. But she rejected the Catholic sort of dogma. But later on, she did align herself with an offshoot of the Catholic Church, which doesn't recognize the Pope, and she got ordained as a Catholic priest, which seemed a reasonable thing. I think that didn't shock me too much. It was then about 4 years later that she then converted to Islam. Then I thought, this is a woman searching for something. She's searching for something. And trauma does that to you, because if your nervous system isn't stable, if it doesn't know how to regulate itself, I'm going to use my favorite little gimmick here. A nervous system is designed to regulate itself much like a spring. It goes up when it needs to and down when it needs to rest and relax. But trauma does one of two things. It isolates you in a sort of freeze state, which is locked shut. You can't operate. You just feel numb, dissociated, or it will send you into a hyperactivation, a fight and flight. And sometimes you'll bounce between those two states, commonly known as at its extreme, bipolar disorder, or you could say ADHD is also, this bouncing. Behavioural issues anyway, because your nervous system can't regulate. Because what you learned as a child was that the world was an unsafe place. And this is true of Sinead. And she not only looked to religion, unsuccessfully, I believe, to solve that problem. And I think religion can be a very powerful thing, but it can't make up for the lack of proper parenting. Having a mother, particularly mother's very important, who loves and cares for you unconditionally. And that never happened for her. The other thing it's going to affect very much is your relationships and what you seek in adult life. And for Sinead, she longed for love. She had 4 partners and a child with each of those men. But what I heard when I was reading her obituary was that, in fact, her final partner was somebody she was so desperate she put on her Facebook group, does anyone want to marry me? I don't know if that's true, but apparently somebody did apply and they did get married, and it lasted about a year. I also found it very sad that her obituary, the one I read anyway in The Guardian, was not written by anybody in her family, even though she had 4 children, 3 of whom survived. It was written by a journalist who knew her. And so you wonder then, what relationship did she have with the children she had? You know that she lost, sadly, her son to suicide as well the year before. He was only 17. And really, this is the nature of trauma, is that her mother was clearly traumatized. Then Sinead was traumatized by that. And then her son is traumatized by her inability to regulate, because a child is looking for those cues of safety in their parent, and those were never available. And so it seemed like his mental health issues, and we're not casting blame here, it's just the way it goes, were caused by her mental health issues. So, and then when he died, I think that was really, for her, the biggest loss, and the grief and the guilt, because guilt will be there, despite knowing that it wasn't directly your fault. That you had an impact on that child. And now we're not here to blame parents or say that everybody should feel guilty. Guilt is actually not useful in this case, because it just pulls you down and stops you acting in ways that might help to mend or build bridges in those relationships. But clearly, forming relationships, whether it's love relationships or relationships in your family, are hugely affected by what happens to you in childhood, and the kind of attachment you have to a parent. And I've talked about that before. Attachment styles are really, really interesting, because they are a pattern that you develop early on, which is repeated in your relationships. So if you were, say, a kind of clingy child, you're more likely to become a clingy adult, what we call anxious ambivalent in the terminology. And if you were a very kind of distant, shut down kind of child because you had to cope in that way, then you're more likely to be what we call an avoidant, dismissive type in adulthood. And so these patterns, they continue throughout life. And for most people, they cause mild problems, mild dysfunctions. For some people, particularly if they're highly sensitive, it can cause chronic illness. And for other people, it shortens their lives massively, like Sinead's, because their mental health is just so precarious. And as someone who's suffered anxiety and continues to suffer anxiety on and off, I have a lot of compassion for anybody that suffers with mental health issues. And it's not as simple as thinking positively and getting over it. There are many tools that I use that help people through this imprint from their childhood to re-regulate their nervous system. But it just needs to be said that Sinead should have been helped, could have been helped. But the mainstream medical model, and I believe she went in and out of a mental health institution in the last 7 years, are based on cognitive models of recovery. So they're saying, you need to reframe things, you need to rethink things. And the way I work is feelings, bottom up, not top down. Getting into touch with your feelings is what really makes the difference, and allowing those to be heard, to be mobilized in your defense. All the things you could not think or could not feel in childhood are able to be experienced in the safe holding of a therapeutic relationship. And sadly, I don't think she had that, or if she did, it was sporadic. and it wasn't enough to prevent her taking her own life. So, Sinead, if you're listening up there, wherever, wherever, whatever your belief system is about where people go when they die, you know, our hearts are with you, but no one needs to suffer like this. And there are tools and there are people out there that can help you. But please, please, folks, cast your net slightly wider if you have the option to do so. Look at somatic processes, somatic experiencing, tapping, EFT, which is what I use, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing are all tools that use the body's responses or the senses to rebalance. Actually, I heard of a new one this week, which is the Safe and Sound protocol developed by Stephen Porges. And that's an audio that has enhanced auditory contrast between voices and background sounds, and aims to rebalance the nervous system that way, because your ear muscles are part of your vagal tone, your vagus nerve, which innervates your head and neck. So another method by which people can help rebalance, and apparently is very helpful in neurodevelopmental disorders like autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. Again, completely outside the mainstream, not something you'll get if you go to your doctor or your secondary healthcare provider, but it's out there and maybe worth exploring. Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk about today, and take care, everyone. Know that there are answers out there, and see you soon. Bye-bye.